Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 3 of our 5-part Guilds of Ravnica limited set review, where today we're going to focus on the Golgari Guild. So this will be similar to the other videos in the series. First, we're going to start off, though, looking at all of the cards in black that do not have watermarks. Then we'll look at all of the Golgari watermark cards that you'll find in the set. We'll talk about each one and their utility and draft or sealed. If you're thinking of maybe choosing Golgari as your guild for the pre-release, this will definitely be a good video to watch. Quickly before we get started, though, just a fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to help support what we do here. Our Patreon page is linked down there. You're also going to find links to products on Amazon. If you make any purchases on Amazon, no matter what it is, once you go through that link, we'll get a small percentage for the channel. Finally, Flipside Gaming still offering a promo code for our viewers. Hopefully you can save some cash while you support the channel. As always, thank you not only to the folks that look at those links, but to all the viewers. You all make the channel what it is. I appreciate each and every one of you. Let's get into it. Normally, I would look at this card and say, oh, it's not too thrilling. I might throw it in my deck if I just really need a flyer. Forecasting costs 3/1 flyer. It just doesn't feel like it's all that economical. But you know what? This is a little different. We're going to look at this card differently because of what Golgari is trying to do. Now, other strategies like Dimir or something like that, I probably just skip this card. But if you're playing Golgari, here's your game plan. You're trying to play some early creatures, turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, that are expendable. They're going to do something, and then they're going to die. But that's okay, because later in the game, once you get to your 5th turn, your 6th turn, your 7th turn, and so on, you're going to be playing these undergrowth spells that care about how many creatures are in your graveyard. So the early kind of expendable, almost fragile-looking creatures you're going to see play into what the strategy is. So they're actually a lot better here than they normally would be. So if I'm in Golgari, this is an okay card. Maybe it doesn't always make my cut, but I do think it does have its spot, definitely in the strategy. Here's another example of that with Burglar Rats. Basically, it's a fragile creature that is going to die relatively quick. It's a 2 casting cost 1/1. I'm usually not a big fan of those kind of stats. But when it enters the battlefield, it does force a discard, so it's not the worst thing in the world, especially in Dimir, because you are trying to be a little more controlling, and there are other discard effects there too, so it might fit there occasionally. Golgari, though, is interested in this because it's going to come out, it's going to do something, and then it is going to die. It buys you time in the early portion of the game, and when it does get to your graveyard, it's going to help your undergrowth stuff later. So again, a card that I normally probably would not play, all of a sudden becomes more playable in these strategies. Child of Night. This one, of course, is a reprint, but it kind of fits in here. Again, another fragile creature, 2/1 for 2. It has lifelink, but I always like this card, and I usually find myself playing it more often than not whenever it is in limited, because if I do get across for 2, that's a 4-point life swing early on in the game. That's actually not that bad. Now, later in the game, it's going to be hard to get across, but it still will gain you 2 life and maybe trade with something. So it usually performs well enough for 2 mana. Creeping Chill. Now, this is a card that works really, really well with Surveil. We're not talking a lot about Surveil today because we covered that in the Dimir video. However, in a Golgari deck, you want to Surveil a little bit because, again, it's going to help populate your graveyard, maybe get some creatures in there at times. Now, this is great with Surveil because if you Surveil this, it's a free spell. You're going to basically just drain your opponent for 3 life for nothing at all, just for milling yourself. And that's actually kind of amazing. Now, if it does end up in your hand, okay, you pay 4 for it. It's not as exciting, but it's still a 6-point life swing. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. Very, very playable, uncommon. If you can grab a couple of these, maybe you get lucky in a draft or something and find 2, that could add up. That could be a difference of a 12-point life swing over the course of a game if you actually play both of those. Kind of crazy. Dead Weight. So here's another reprint, and this is always a solid card as well. It's technically an enchantment, so it's not an instant speed removal spell or anything. But -2/-2 to a creature. This is going to be really solid for just 1 black mana. These are also a common. You should be able to find them, but they will go fast in a draft. Dowser of Lights. Yikes. Alright, it's a curve filler, 4/5 for 5. Not a lot to say about it. If you need it, it's there for you. Hopefully you don't need it. Sometimes in sealed, you might be backed into a corner and you kind of have to play something with a little bit of power toughness behind it in the 5 spot. If this is all you got, this is all you got. But you'll try to avoid it. Gruesome Menagerie. This is an interesting card because as you're playing and you're starting to populate your graveyard, maybe you're surveilling or whatever you're doing to get creatures in there, this will bring them back out, but directly to the battlefield. Now, it doesn't target, so that's good, because if you don't have a 1, 2, and 3 converted mana cost creature, it doesn't matter. If you have 1 or 2 of those 3, you can still use this, and it's okay. So that's good. Obviously, it's a nombo with some of the cards that want creatures in the graveyard, so that's a little weird, but I still like the card a lot, because there's enough value here. Let's pretend my average limited deck, maybe I don't have any 1-drops or like 1/1-drop. I have a lot of 2 and 3 drops, though. So I should at some point in the game, considering I'm not playing this anyway until I have 5 mana at least, then I should be able to hit a 2 and 3 drop, considering you're getting 5 converted mana back on the battlefield for 5 converted mana, but those are cards that weren't in your hand, so they wouldn't have been available to you otherwise. So it's kind of like netting a card at the end of the day. You use this one to get 1 back and then hopefully a second one. If you're lucky, a third, but that won't always happen. Now, why would you do that when you want to populate your graveyard? I think these are situations where your undergrowth creatures just weren't enough. Maybe they got destroyed or what have you, and now you're desperate. You need to repopulate. You need to rebuild. Maybe a board sweep happens, something along those lines. And I do think it's good enough. I would run it as a panic button if nothing else. Maybe I don't use it. Sometimes the undergrowth thing will be clicking and I won't need this. But to bring creatures back and the economy behind it feels pretty good, especially in sealed. Yeah, I'm going to run this in Golgari. Maybe not all the time in Dimir, just depends on what my curve looks like. I might be running less creatures there. Hired Poisoner. Yeah, it's a 1/1 Death Touch for 1. We see these a lot of the time. It's especially good, again, in this Golgari build, though, because you simply will put this out, it will trade with something, definitely trade up 99% of the time, and then it goes to the graveyard and populates the graveyard. Also, if that's not your plan, this is still a good card. In Dimir, for example, it's another controlling card that will gum up the ground for you. Crawl Swarm. I like this one a lot, actually. It costs 5 for a 4/1 flyer. Very fragile, of course. That's the theme of Golgari today. However, you can also pay a black and 2, discard a creature card, and then return this from your graveyard to your hand. So you do have to play it again, and 5 mana is a lot. But it is a way to perhaps exchange it with another creature and give yourself some evasion back again. 4 in the air is pretty significant too. Even though it could die, sure, it's not going to last long, most likely. But if it gets across 4 damage and then dies and you get it back later, get 4 more damage across with it, that certainly does not feel bad. I really like this uncommon quite a bit, actually. Midnight Reaper. I love this card. Now, I'm usually not a big fan of 3/2s for 3. You know that if you watch these videos. I hate when they trade down for 2 drops, but this is different because of that ability. Now, anytime a non-token creature I control dies, and that includes this creature, so there's some extra value there if it did trade down right away, but I get to draw a card. I do take a point of damage, but I get to draw a card. Now, yes, sometimes these type of effects could get out of control if things aren't going your way, but let's face it, if that's the case, you probably were going to lose the game anyway. If you take some damage to draw cards, that is usually no big deal, because simply that damage is counteracted by all the value you're getting by pulling ahead of your opponent with these cards you're drawing. The new cards are going to protect you, maybe help you gain some life, maybe attack in and be aggressive. Whatever you draw, hopefully you don't just draw a bunch of lands, but whatever you draw is going to help you outpace your opponent. So if I take 5 or 6 or 7 damage over the course of the game, I'm fine with that because I'm really pulling ahead now. Ultimately, it's a rare. You're not going to see it a ton, but if you do get the opportunity to play with it, go for it. It will be good, actually, no matter where you can play. I would consider even splashing this into some other builds. Definitely good in Dimir as well. Never Happens. I love this card. So the art and the name, it's amazing. Anyway, it is a sorcery speed where target opponent reveals their hands. You choose a non-land card from the player's hand or graveyard and exile it. So that's actually really nice. I'm thinking of this more as a Dimir card, though. It's more controlling. However, if I'm playing Golgari, I might sideboard it in if my opponent is going to the graveyard a little too often. Maybe they're playing Golgari as well, and I want to grab a creature and exile it out of their graveyard. Maybe they're playing Isn't, and they got some jumpstart that I can just kind of get ahead on and get rid of so it doesn't come back at me again. So this is a decent sideboard option for Golgari most of the time. But for Dimir, this is definitely main deckable any day. Pilfering Imp. Here's another really fragile card. It's a 1-drop 1/1 with flying, and it can sacrifice itself. Pay a black and 1, tap, sacrifice it. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card, You can only use it anytime you would be able to use a sorcery. Dimir would be interested in something like this for the control element, and of course Golgari is interested in something like this because it's small, it's a little flyer, it might even put a little damage across early on, then it's going to die at some point, whether I'm sacrificing it or it dies some other way, and then it's populating the graveyard. Plague Crafter, another fantastic crossover card here. Dimir's interested because of the Edict effect it's controlling, and also Golgari's especially interested because they also like Edict effects, who doesn't? But also they're getting a creature in their graveyard a lot of the time. Granted, if you got a Planeswalker, you could put that in the graveyard, but that's rarely going to come into play. And because you have this creature, you don't have to worry about the discard most of the time, because if nothing else, you just sacrifice this creature. So, yes, perfect for both of those strategies. Ritual of Soot. I love board sweeps. Another good crossover card here. This one is conditional, of course. You can't really hit anything that's 4 or higher. But this really makes a lot of sense for Golgari because the little creatures are expendable anyway. So if I'm in a situation where I have a bunch of little creatures out, maybe one big creature with undergrowth, I don't mind playing this. I might hit some of my opponent's stuff, and if I do hit some of my stuff, it's okay. It's the small stuff that I want in the graveyard anyway. It will work to my advantage a lot of the time. Dimir, being a control build, is also interested in this, even though, again, it can't deal with everything. It deals with a lot of stuff. That's just good enough for Dimir. A lot of times, too, their win condition cards are going to be like mid-range flyers and stuff, so they don't care about the small creatures getting blown up. They're not going to have all that many anyway. Severed Strands, kind of doing both things for the 2 guilds that are in black. Dimir, it's another control card. You're destroying something. You do have to sacrifice one of your creatures to do it, but as long as you're comfortable and you feel like your Dimir build has enough creatures where that's okay, then you're going to go for it and be fine. In limited, I don't think it'll be an issue for you. In Golgari, you get to sacrifice one of your creatures, so one of these small little 1-drops that you don't care about anyway. Sacrifice it, it populates your graveyard, and you take out something your opponent controls that could be much larger, and you gain some life too. Nothing wrong with that. Spinal Centipede. It's another 3/2 for 3, but whenever this dies, I put a +1/+1 counter on another creature I control. Okay, I'm down with that. And especially, again, in Golgari, I'm really down with it, because this isn't meant to last long. In fact, many times I do want to trade. Even if it is trading down, I want the thing in my graveyard. Undercity Necrolist. Okay, finally a little more of a substantial creature now. A 3/3 for 4. Kind of average stats, but it has an interesting ability to pay 1, sack another creature, and this will get a +1/+1 counter, and also has Menace till end of turn. So this could grow over time. The Menace could definitely be relevant, and also, as you go, can populate your graveyard. Seems perfect for the Golgari game plan. Veiled Shade. I love the black shades because they give you +1/+1 when you pump them. They don't give you +1/+0 like the red cards do. These can be really substantial, especially late game if you're in a board stall. A little fragile at first, 2/2 for 3, but again, with this Golgari strategy, I'm not too concerned about that. Definitely less concerned than I normally would be. And when you're in a board stall later on, you have tons of mana, nothing to do with it, this will be great for you. I like running one of this type of card. A second one does feel a little redundant, even though this could die, of course. But if you are in a board stall and you draw your second one of these, it's not really doing a whole lot because you can only pump into one of them at a time, of course. So one is just fine and can actually do some work. Vicious Rumors. All right, this is more of a Dimir card for me because it's trying to add value through attrition. Make the opponent discard, take a point of damage, mill, I'll gain a point of life. It's real cheap. The only problem with this card for me, though, unless I'm all in on some kind of mill plan or something, I just feel like this could backfire. Like, if my opponent discards a jumpstart spell and mills a jumpstart spell, now granted, that won't happen all the time, but they still have 2 cards at their disposal, and one of them I just basically handed to them by letting them mill it. So I feel like this sometimes could backfire. I don't know if I'm playing this very often. Okay, let's move on to the cards that have the Golgari watermark now, with the black cards first. And finally, we're going to start seeing some of these undergrowth payoffs. Here's one of them. It's not one of the best ones, but if you need it, it's there for you. It costs 7, a little expensive for a 6/5, doesn't have trample, doesn't have evasion, but when it enters the battlefield, you are doing some direct damage to the opponent based on how many creatures are in your graveyard. Not bad, not amazing, definitely playable if you don't have any better payouts. Mausoleum Secrets, here's another undergrowth card. This time you're tutoring for a black card, but it's based on converted mana costs from what is in your graveyard when it comes to the amount of creatures. So it's very situational. I can't play this on turn 2 and go and get my huge bomb and put it in my hands. That could be a problem for some, but not for me. You know why? Because it's still a tutor. And it is an instant, which does make up for some of the narrowness. Sometimes you may be in trouble and might have to play this early to get a cheaper removal spell or creature defensively. But what you want to do with this card is wait. Wait till later in the game when you have a lot of stuff in your graveyard. Then go get one of your big bomb cards, tutor it up, and then you can play it and hopefully pull ahead. That's the dream. That might not always happen, but you know what? Most of the time, this card's still going to be good for you. Moodmarked Painter. This one I'm not super high on. It is an undergrowth card. When it comes into play, it will pump something +X+O and give it menace based on how many creatures are in your graveyard until end of turn. However, that's only good if you're ahead and you're trying to close out a game. It's not really good if you're behind. And I don't consider Golgari or Dimir an aggressive build, so this feels a little out of place in some ways. And it's a 2/3 for 4. Yeah, I think I can find better things. Necrotic Wounds. Great removal spell. It just costs 1 black, instant speed. Yes, it is dependent on the amount of creatures in your graveyard. You can't necessarily play this on turn 1 and take out a 1/1 creature or anything like that. But as the game goes on, you know you're going to have creatures in your graveyard, especially in Golgari. Even in Dimir, which will be playing less creatures and will have less in the graveyard at any given time, it's still a good removal spell to protect yourself and control the board. This will work well in both of those builds, actually. It's also nice that this can deal with an indestructible creature, and it exiles the creature so that it cannot go towards a undergrowth count or become a reanimation target later. Golgari Raiders. This is the first of the green watermark cards. I'm not a big fan of this one. Here's the problem. You want to play this early enough. I mean, it's a 4-drop. It doesn't have evasion, it doesn't have trample, it does have haste, so that's kind of nice. But at the same time, if you play it too soon, it's not going to be all that big. Maybe it's like a 3/3 if you're lucky, a 4/4. Later on, when it might be big, it's just not impressive anymore. Like if you're playing this on turn 12 and you're getting a 6/6 haste creature or 7/7 haste creature, well, that's cool, but it might not be able to do a lot. You might be sitting across from the Selesnya player with a bunch of 1/1 tokens that can chump block this thing all day, right? So I think you can find better things for 4 mana than this. It's playable though if you need it. Hatchery Spider. This one's awesome. First off, let's ignore the ability for a second. 5/7 reach for 7 mana and limited. There's nothing wrong with that. It's very defensive. It can also be offensive if you need it to be. And the undergrowth ability is just icing on top at this point. Note that it does say green permanent, not just creature. Kind of wish the extra cards went to the graveyard, but that's okay. The more creatures that you have in your graveyard, the more likely you're going to hit something. Hopefully you get a chance to hit something with this. If you do, tons of value. If you miss, you miss. But even if you do miss, it's not the end of the world. It's still a really solid creature. But if you hit, you're going to value town. It's going to be awesome for you. This is a rare. You won't see it a whole lot, but when you get it, try to play it. And needless to say, this is good in Selesnya as well. Crawl Forgers. This one's okay. I probably don't main deck this, though, unless I'm up against a really aggressive build. Maybe Boros. I'm taking a lot of early damage, and I want cards to catch me up. This will gain me some life later in the game, and I do like it for that reason, but I don't see myself main decking it, just simply because gaining a little life and then having a 4/4 for 5, it just doesn't feel good enough. It's a little too defensive. Crawl Harpooner. Now this, on the other hand, I'm all about. 3/2 reach for 2? What? I don't even need to read the rest of the card. I'm on board. This is a high pick uncommon for me. Fantastic economy. Most of the time it's going to trade up for something larger. Maybe a 3-drop, maybe a 4-drop. It could trade for a flyer if you're real lucky. This is incredible. Now, there's also a whole other clause here about when it enters the battlefield, you get to select a flyer your opponent controls. And then this gets +X+O until end of turn based on how many creatures in your graveyard, and you can choose to have this fight that flyer if you want. Well, if you use it as a removal spell for a flyer, and even if it dies and goes to your graveyard to help your other undergrowth stuff, that's awesome too. But even if that doesn't happen, 3/2 reach for 2, you gotta be kidding me. And I don't think I need to say, also consider this for Selesnya. Vigor Spore Worm. This is one of the payoff cards that I do like a little bit better. It's a 6/4 for 6. Yes, that does feel a tad fragile, but it can't be blocked by more than one creature. Plus, when it enters the battlefield, it has this effect where it gives +X/+X based again on creatures in your graveyard, and also vigilance to a creature until end of turn. So it lets you be aggressive, and it's also a sizable creature that's hard to deal with on its own. Yeah, I could see myself playing one of these in Golgari as well as Selesnya easily. Alright, let's move on to the gold cards and Golgari colors. Assassin's Trophy. This card's horrible. This is the worst card that they have printed in years. Absolute years. I can't believe they created this thing. I don't know what Mark Rosewater was thinking. Let's just move on to the next card. Alright, I'm just kidding. This is the best card they printed ever. Okay, maybe not ever. Black Lotus was decent. But this card is phenomenal. This is one of the best pieces of removal we've seen ever. Now, this is going to have a huge impact on Modern, Legacy, Vintage, but we're here to talk about Limited today, so let's talk some Limited. Do you play this? Absolutely, you play this. A lot of times in draft, you're not going to open the first pack and just slam down the gold card when you see it. You usually try to keep yourself open, go for a card that's a single color, kind of see what happens. Of course, things are different in Ravnica. There's more color fixing, and you have more powerful cards, of course, that are going to be gold cards. So it is a different environment. But at the same time, don't let anything stop you. If you see this thing, go ahead and pick it up. First pickable, all day long. It's a rare. Luckily, you won't encounter this all too much being rare. But if you can get your hands on this, play it, destroy target permanent and opponent controls at instant speed. Now, they do get to look for a land, kind of like Path to Exile. That land comes into play untapped too. That's worth noting. But you know what? Who cares? This can hit anything, including a land. So keep that in mind if they have a non-basic land that's bugging you. So I don't know what else to say. Play it. This is splashable. Even if you're in like a green deck that's not running black or vice versa, you'll splash to get the other color. It's awesome. Charnel Troll. I don't love this one. I know some people do, but here's my problem with it. First off, it's a 4/4 for 3. I love that. Great start. It has trample. Okay, what's not to love here, right? Well, here's my problem. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, you get a +1/+1 counter on this. Otherwise, sack it. Yikes. Okay, so if at any time I don't have a creature in my graveyard, I have to sacrifice this thing? That's not going to feel good. So this isn't really a 3-drop, because on turn 3, you're not going to have a lot in your graveyard to sustain this. So that's not good. Now, if you do get back to your turn and you exile a creature, then it's a 5/5 trample creature you're attacking in with maybe on turn 4. That's good, but I can't guarantee that that's going to happen a lot or that you can keep it alive for another turn. Now, that secondary ability is interesting too. Discard a creature card to put a +1/+1 counter on this. You're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket here. Now, if you're using this in conjunction with a lot of other Undergrowth payouts, maybe I could see it. But I just feel like it's too fragile of a situation here. The strategy just feels too fragile. Even though you can use that pump ability in combat. Because now I'm discarding my creature card instead of playing it, putting the counter on this, maybe exiling it as well and getting a second counter. But at some point, if my opponent blows this thing up, I'm using a lot of resources and I'm also digging into my graveyard when it comes to creatures. So that's going to hurt my other Undergrowth effects. It just doesn't feel good to me. Not to say you couldn't be lucky and have a moment where it's fantastic, but I think I'm skipping this one. It's a rare that I'm just not really high on. Erstwhile Trooper. This one I'm a little better with because it's a 2/2 for 3. Yeah, that doesn't sound good, but discard a creature card, it gets +2/+2 and trample till end of turn. You can only do that once though, so you can't keep pumping it. It can only be a 4/4 trample. But for 3 mana and I'm populating my graveyard, I don't have to worry about the clause on the last card about it's going to go away if I can't exile a creature or something from my graveyard. Then, yeah, this is very playable, and I can see myself running this. It's a common, so it's a nice 3-drop pickup for your curve. Glowspore Shaman. I was a little surprised we didn't see more cards like this, but in lieu of these cards, of course, you have the Surveil effects in black, so that makes sense. However, this will be good for the Golgari build, definitely. It's going to help populate your graveyard. You don't have to put the land on top of your library from your graveyard. That's a may. You don't want to tempo yourself unless you just really need the land, of course. Also, it's a 3/1, a fragile creature that maybe it trades and dies and just goes towards the Undergrowth count. Golgari Broker. Not too forgiving on colors. There's a whole cycle of these, of course, 2 black and 2 green. But if you're in these colors, it's just fine. It's a 3/4 when it enters the battlefield, return target permanent from graveyard to hand. Kind of wish it was any card, but okay, I'll take it. Permanent. There's definitely enough value here for the 4 mana, even though the colors are strict. You also get the 3/4 body. It'll be very good for you. Izoni, Thousand-Eyed. Alright, this is expensive for a 2/3, right? But it's got a great effect, definitely. When this enters the battlefield, you get to create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token for each card in your graveyard. So great Undergrowth payoff. This time you're going wide instead of tall. However, it gives you something to do with these wide creatures. Sacrifice another creature for a black and green, and you gain 1 life and draw a card. So that's kind of awesome. Not only are you able to throw regular creatures in your graveyard and draw cards to help with Undergrowth, but also these tokens you made then will also convert well to card draw relatively cheaply too. You might be able to draw a few cards per turn actually once you play this. That's kind of awesome. It's fragile, and again, the color requirements are not forgiving, not very splashable. But in a Golgari deck, yeah, I'd definitely play this. Molder Hulk. This one I'm not thrilled with either. The problem again for me is it's a 6/6, but it doesn't have evasion, doesn't have trample. If this had trample, this would be a different story. But my problem is, yes, the undergrowth is nice, but it requires a certain chain of events. For me to play this early enough for it to matter, I have to get a lot of creatures very quickly into my graveyard. And if that doesn't happen, then by the time this thing comes out, it might not matter all that much anymore. 6/6 is good, but it's not amazing necessarily in a board stall or something like that. So it's playable, don't get me wrong, and many times if you don't have any other high curve things, like this is very substantial, and it is going to bring a lot of power toughness to the battlefield. But just remember, you can't have too many high curve cards, and most of the time you're going to have something better. Okran Assassin. This is going to be really good for you. Now, adjust expectations just a little bit for a moment. It doesn't have haste. Your opponent's going to see this coming, and they can prepare a little bit for it. If they have creatures they can tap with abilities or something, they may be able to protect them or what have you. But basically, if you can untap with this thing, attack in with it, they have to block with all their stuff. You're going to take out their best thing most of the time. And then all your other creatures get by for a free hit. Maybe that's game ending a lot of the time. Get you out of a board stall for sure. Now, with that being said, they have a lot of time to respond to this. It's only one toughness. It's going to die probably a good percentage of the time before you even get there. But even if it does, or if they decide to attack you and be more aggressive and you trade, well, okay, it goes to your graveyard and it works again towards the undergrowth for Golgari. Nothing wrong with that. Again, I would consider splashing if I'm not completely on the Golgari plan too. Rhizome Lurcher. Okay, now this one I like, which might feel a little counterintuitive compared to some things I said about some other cards. For example, this doesn't have trample, it doesn't have evasion. Also, its size is going to be dependent on what's happening in your graveyard. But there's a difference here. This only costs 4. For 4, I'm okay with taking the gamble here, because many times this will come in as a 4/4 or 5/5, and on turn 4, or turn 5 even, that's not bad. It's good economy, it's a nice curve filler. Having one of these will be decent for you. It's not amazing necessarily, but it will be good. Swarm Guild Mage. Y'all know how I feel about Guild Mages. I love them. This one no exception. 2/2 for 2, 2 different colors granted, but I love the abilities. Yes, these can be a little slow, sure. You have to tap them before they do anything. They don't have haste, so you have to wait till you get back to your turn. But the abilities are phenomenal. This first one will get you past a board stall, maybe even close out a game. The second one will gain you some life, so even if you're in a situation where you're maybe close to being able to use that first ability to take over and maybe win, if you're not quite there yet, in the meantime, you just gain a little life and you bide your time. Nothing wrong with that either. And all the guild mages, I would consider splashing in other builds outside of whatever guild they're in as well, if it's possible. And this is yet another high pickable uncommon in draft. Undercity Uprising. I'm just kind of looking at this as a forecasting cost sorcery removal spell. Yes, there's conditions attached to it, but it will be good for you, and you'll be happy to play it. Actually, a relatively high-ish pick common, definitely in the middle to higher portion of a pack and draft. You might want to grab this. The fact that it can allow all your creatures to have Death Touch and then one of them gets to fight, that's cool because you're going to take out usually their best creature. And even if you lose that creature, it should be your worst one. And maybe it will help with Undergrowth. So you might have a really profitable attack at that point that you normally would not have had. So this is definitely a strong common. Underrealm Lich. All right, it's a mythic. You're not going to see a whole lot of this. But it's good. I mean, 5 casting costs 4/3. Whenever you draw a card, instead you get to look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and then you put one in your hand, the rest in your graveyard. So you're populating your graveyard, you're getting card selection. What's not to love here? Oh, and it can quasi-regenerate with this kind of newfangled regeneration. And you do pay 4 life to do that. That's a big chunk of life, but sometimes it might be worth it. Other times maybe it won't be. This is one of those cards your opponent has to find an answer to, and if they can't find an answer to it, they're in trouble. Because as long as you're not already really far behind when you play it, all this is going to do is pull you ahead. It's perfect for Golgari, another card I would consider splashing outside of Golgari as well. Speaking of mythics that you get to rarely play with in Limited, Vraska Golgari Queen. This one is awesome too. The +2 effect is interesting. You may sacrifice another permanent if you do gain 1 life and draw a card. Card draw is awesome. And of course, sacrificing a creature might work into what Golgari is trying to do. But sometimes you can't compromise that. Sometimes you can't compromise your board state. If that's the case, you can still +2 and not do that. So all of a sudden this thing just has 6 loyalty, even if you do nothing else. That's not bad for 4 mana to begin with. The -3 is what gets me really interested though. Basically, it's just Abrupt Decay. So Abrupt Decay, very, very powerful. It's going to be able to hit a lot of targets. And you can just play that in Abrupt Decay, and that might be all this does, and that could just be fine for you. Or maybe I plus it once or twice, Abrupt Decay a couple times over the course of the game. That's going to be really hard to come back from as well for your opponent. That -9 is very good as long as you have creatures to attack in with and you can get some damage across or a trample creature. Now, if you can't get damage across or you're behind, it doesn't save you, and you're going a long way to get there. So I would kind of hope that it would be a little more definite, or at least something that was a little more powerful if I was losing. But with that being said, I don't really like to evaluate a Planeswalker on the ultimate anyway. Yes, it could win you the game some of the time, but honestly, if you got to that point, you probably would have won anyway. It's really those first two abilities I'm interested in. So yeah, obviously, if you get a chance to play this, play it. Not just in Golgari. If you can splash it somewhere else, go for it. Here's a hybrid card with Pitiless Gorgon. Very good card. 3 casting cost, 2/2, Death Touch. A lot of times it will trade up. And with the hybrid colors, it also gives you more color flexibility if you want to play it in different decks, which is nice too. Very, very playable common. Here's our first split card of the day, Find and Finality. Find's interesting because, again, it's a little counterintuitive normally to what Golgari's trying to do. But again, sometimes you just need board presence. So going back to your graveyard to grab a couple creatures, bring them to your hands, and replay them, that could be good enough many times. Actually, in a game of Limited that just turns into a big creature fight, that will be great for you. It's sorcery speed, but that's okay. Also, the hybrid mana, again, makes it more flexible to play it in some other decks. Just toss that in the Selesnya deck, even if you have no plans on playing Finality. Now, Finality is good too, a little more expensive. So again, it's going to feel like a conditional board sweep. Hopefully, you're taking out most of your opponent's stuff while you're keeping at least one of your things. If that one thing happens to have like an undergrowth ability or something like that, well, wonderful, because you might be losing some creatures too. Ultimately, it feels really good to have in a Golgari deck. It kind of makes sense for what they're trying to do. But again, another effect I'd be happy to splash into other decks as well. This is a rare. It won't show up a lot, but definitely play it. You'll be happy. It's going to do enough for you, and the added flexibility will be great. Status and Statue. Okay, maybe this one isn't as grand, but it's still really, really good. Let's look at status first. Target creature gets +1/+1, gains Death Strike until end of turn for just one hybrid in Golgari colors. So basically, it's a combat trick that's going to allow you to trade a lot of the time, and maybe sometimes keep your creature if you're lucky. So that's really cheap, instant speed gotcha that I really enjoy playing from time to time. Normally, that might not be enough for me to get it into the deck, though, out of my 23 playables, but Statue really tips the scales. For a green, black, and 2, destroy target artifact, creature, or enchantment. Yeah, just a flat-out removal spell for 4 at instant speed. I'm going to be real happy to play it. Gives you versatility as well when it comes to targeting. This card is an awesome uncommon. First pickable uncommon, actually, in a lot of draft packs. This thing will do work for you. And again, another card I would consider splashing. You could throw this in a Selesnya deck. You don't even have to worry about color fixing for status, and then maybe just have a tad bit of black in your deck for Statue. The flexibility here is just simply phenomenal. Again, you kind of want a Statue, but in a pinch, if you need to, you can status. All right, let's move on to the one artifact, Golgari Locket. Talked a lot about these in the other videos, so I won't spend a lot of time here. Basically, the same thing goes. Good color fixing card that later you can sacrifice to not only replace itself, but go a card deeper. Many times you'll put this in your Golgari deck and be happy with it because of the ramp that it gives you and also the flexibility. But this is also very good if you're trying to splash one of these colors. Another card you're very familiar with, Golgari Guild Gate. And same thing as I said in the other videos, they're going to help you smooth out your mana. They do slow you down a little bit, but I don't really consider that a problem with the Golgari deck. You're not necessarily trying to race, you're trying to build up to big stuff, so coming into play tapped isn't a big deal. Again, these really shine though if you're trying to splash one of these colors. And finally, of course, another classic card, Overgrown Tomb. And like I've been saying in the other videos, this is going to be really solid for you and actually doesn't have to slow you down under certain circumstances. But I would be careful. There's some aggressive builds out there. Boros and Izzet can do a lot of damage quickly. So you might want to consider slowing it down a little bit, letting this come into play tapped even when normally you might not want to if you're in one of those matchups. Alright, that's Golgari. Now tomorrow we're going to take a little break and actually do our Market Watch video that we do every Saturday. Sunday though, we'll be back with Izzet. Then Monday we'll wrap things up with Selesnya. But until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.